started today, we have a really important session on environmental justice. So to moderate the panel, please welcome the director of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, Sabrina Motley.
Good morning. Greetings to you from California. I am Sabrina Lynn Motley, director of the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and I want to thank you for this conversation about environmental justice and community. This conversation is timely and important, and I think speaks to a lot of what you've heard over the last couple of days. I want to thank the organizers for the summit. This work is the product of many hearts and hands. So my sincere thanks to all of them for bringing us together across disciplines and continents. To this conversation, I want to welcome Fred, community advocate for clean water, and Patuxent, Riverkeeper, the only Riverkeeper of American descent in the U.S. I also want to welcome Dejah Powell, Midwest regional organizer of Sunrise Movement and curator of Get to Green, a Chicago-based environmental education nonprofit. And last but not least, Queen Quet, author, preservationist, performance artist, and Chieftess of the Gullah Geechee Nation. I want to welcome you all. Hello. So, I want to thank you for helping us think about what Fred, I think, so rightly called the enduring work of environmental justice. Let's start with where you want us to end. In this moment of challenge and crisis, there are a handful of people who are asking us, in essence, to build a boat while we paddle it. And we've heard many of them at the summit already. There's a groundswell of people who are talking about America 2.0, reimagining common ground, equity, and the like. So I'm going to ask you to start with giving us your elevator pitch. In this new world, what does environmental justice mean to you and to your communities? What does it look like? I'm going to start with you, Fred.
So to me, and let me clarify, to me, environmental justice is looking at social and environmental problems through the lens of equity and justice, which is a pretty powerful lens because it's a great organizing principle. We are essentially community organizers working with the environment very locally. And environment is entirely local to most people, right? They know the environment that they're familiar with. Whether you live in a city, whether you live on a beach in Waikiki, the environment might be entirely different. But I do think that environmentalism seen through the lens of social justice is a compelling theme, and I think you used the term durable. I like to use the term durable as well, because it's work that lasts. It lasts longer than a campaign. It lasts longer than a grant. By empowering communities, these are movements that are internal to the community that bring fairness and justice, basically, to fundamental entitlements. Some things that people take for granted, others don't have those things. All right, the haves and the have-nots are a great divide, I think, in environmentalism. So I'll stop there, but I mean, that's the essential underlying principle. It's local work, it's justice-based, it's systemic, it's changing paradigms. There it is.
Excellent. Dejah, I'm going to ask you the same question. Tell us where you want us to end up. What is your vision for environmental justice?
Fred said, but also adding that it's looking at my community, my home, and the places that many Black and Brown people call home, and seeing those places not deemed as disposable or a dumping ground for the wealthy, the elite, and the people who have the finances and funding to make decisions that ultimately now sort of negatively impact Black and Brown communities. So having power to see our communities as worthy of love and access to resources that we don't see often now for a lot of Black, Indigenous, and POC communities.
Beautiful. Queen Quet, now to you. Environmental justice, what does it look like for you as the Chieftess of the Gullah Geechee Nation?
peace and blessings. We're so glad for Dejah and things like that. And from the Gullah Geechee Nation with the Chilla. So the way that we look at the world is holistically, and we look at it as a circle, as you see in our flag here, where I'm seated. And I looked at the word justice from the American standpoint, the English standpoint. And an example actually involved what we live here in the Gullah Geechee Nation. And that is to have equity and equitable opportunities, as well as peace and respect for others. And so where I start be where I end. And that's what I would expect environmental justice to actually be when we ultimately get to the goal we've all been fighting for.
Beautiful. So let's make our way to this vision that you have all laid out for us. Fred, I'm going to turn back to you, and can you talk to us about the role of coalition building and getting us to this moment of justice? In terms of your work, what does that look like? What has worked well? What are the challenges? Talk us through a little of that.
So community self-determinism is a core principle. We go into communities to the extent we're invited, listen to what concerns and issues people bring to our attention and where they seek our help. We do not work in communities where we do not at least have that basic credential. And I think that's not always understood, because I think this goes to domain, the sense of domain that people have, where they're comfortable working, where they're capable of working, where they're competent culturally to work. And so I would say that to the extent we are partnered with and collaborate with communities, we often try to, as much as possible, become a part of those communities. We share their pain. We go to their community meetings, and we take our cues from those communities, because again, that core principle is that determinism that we're trying to build that makes, again, a durable movement that will last after our participation, because we know we're not going to clean up the Patuxent River in my lifetime or in any Riverkeeper's lifetime. The kind of work we're interested in is the kind of work that actually lasts. And so empowering these communities, I think, is dynamic work. There's a lot of ingenuity to be found in these communities that we interact with. And we look for where the worst problems are to be found. Because to me, if you're working where the worst problems are, all those other problems seem far less challenging. So it's work that actually has a force multiplier attached to it.
And what do you do in those moments when the community pushes back, when things don't go to plan? What kind of tools do you use to, sort of guide people back to a place where they can move forward together?
So there are practical tools that are human relations skills. I'm a mediator by training. I've had legal, I went to law school as well. But that's really not the key. The key, I think, is humanitarian compassion for these communities and the willingness to listen and take to heart the concerns and problems that they have, and to start there. That's hugely important. And to me, that also goes to values. We look very closely at the values inherent in the partnerships that we create, so that there is inclusion inherently a part of that. But again, I keep beating it on the head, but I mean, again, to us, it's about self-determinism for these communities and helping them actualize what they have and make the best of, redeeming these privileges that have been denied them. Communities that don't have a lot of resources. I think one of the other speakers mentioned that as well. These are not resources that these communities take for granted. Most environmentalists walk into these places and don't bring anything with them other than a petition, a sign-on list, or educational content. And we try to bring actual resources to the community directed by their needs. They ask us for what they want, and we try to find it and help them with that.
So that's actually a really good segue to Dejah and the work that you're doing. I mean, you are a young person working with even younger people and get them to green. What are the misconceptions about interest of quote unquote urban youth around the environment? What kinds of questions are they asking? And what do we need to know to create a movement that recenters their needs, wants, and visions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's interesting because a lot of the organizing that I do now is with Sunrise Movement, Youth-Led Climate Movement, and still do work, given we're social distancing, of supporting young people and getting connected to nature and to gardening. And I think a lot of it is this assumption that youth who live in the city aren't connected to the environment. But I think there are so many ways to pull people outside to things that we're connected with when it comes to food, and knowing that food access is like a huge issue in cities like Chicago and other urban Black areas across the country. And so connecting the outdoors with food and having conversations about things that young people care about, but just bringing them closer to those things.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit specifically more about what kinds of questions they're asking, and where have you felt challenged? Where have you learned from the younger people that you're working with?
Yeah, I think the challenge comes from working at the more local level with the work that I'm doing with young students from Vanderpool, which is the elementary school that I went to, and seeing these questions around how do we take this and scale it so that it's not just one school that now has the opportunity to grow tomatoes and kale and collard greens, but like how do we scale this so that every young student, every Black student has the ability to learn about urban agriculture and nutrition. And so I think that's where the work that I do organizing with Sunrise comes into play, because we're fighting for a federal Green New Deal that will impact the entire country. And so how do we start to see the work that we're doing at the local level scale to meet the urgency of needs that people all across the country have?
So, Queen Quet, this idea of working locally, nationally, internationally is something that you have done and do. You obviously have deep roots in the Gullah Geechee Nation, but your vision spans the globe. And I'm wondering if you can help us also think about what it is that you bring when you work internationally, and what it is that you take away and bring back to the nation when you're out at the UN and other places.
Your question is so apropos, because my brother here on the panel has made the choice to use the word self-determination. We became the Gullah Geechee Nation because we were the first group of people of African descent in North America to stand on our international human right to self-determination. And part of that was to ensure that we would maintain our land ownership, because we know that our culture is inextricably tied to the land. And people will also hear us often say, the water to bring we are, the water going to take we back, and things like that. And Hona must take care of the root for heal the tree is the term that I came up with for the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition. So in the work that we do, we have international supporters and we have members that are in multiple states as well for the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, which was the first organization to exist in the world with the term Gullah Geechee in it. And that's the organization that launched me into going into the international arena with the help of the International Human Rights Association for American Minorities. So when I leave my community, I see myself as a microcosm of the Gullah Geechee Nation, taking my community to other parts of the world, to people who have never heard of us, and never yet people that crack a teeth like a thing like that at all, and that look at the world from a different perspective that oftentimes is linear or it's a box, as opposed to being a circle of connection. And when I go out and hear what we're discussing in terms of international human rights law, indigenous rights, the rights of people of color, the rights of women on an international scale, I'm able to interpret it or boil it down, one might say here in the South, in such a way that it can come back and be used immediately, ingested by everyone, down to the little children, all the way to the elders, in our own language, in our own culture, and in our own traditions. And I think it's critical that people get, I like to say, overstanding of the fact that there is no one size fit all for every community, that you do have to go in respecting that community mannerisms and the way in which they see things. And that's why we even wrote a book. We did a book called We Be Gullah Geechee, which is cultural capital and collaboration anthology, to use as a mechanism for people who want to work in our communities to know how to work with us in a way that's respectful to our self-determination, our culture and to help with cultural competence. And that's what I loved about what the brother said, because he's talking about building relationships. And I think that goes both ways within my community and every scale that you've mentioned on the local, national, and international level. You need to build relationships, and then you have the bond that's inextricably tied, that people are willing to continue to work together on whatever it is we're trying to achieve. And that's necessary right now, especially because we're all trying to have some optimism on this earth and all trying to work together to heal this earth right now, as much as we want people to heal from COVID. So we have to look at that, but we have to take from those communities what the community gives, not what we just come and rob them of. And that's critical to think about, whether going out or coming back in.
So thank you for that, because what you say makes me think about the notion of diversity itself and cultural competency. And, we're 4 African Americans from very different walks of life. There's a diversity here, and yet there's a larger diversity to which we must attend as we do this work. Fred, I'm going to ask you to just give us some thoughts about what diversity means in the movement. And what should we be careful about?
So diversity is a term that I think gets misused a lot, because diversity on its own is certainly not equality or equity. In fact, I think diversity gets manipulated in a way that sometimes, in fact, often gets used as tokenism. I have yet to find an environmental justice community demanding more diversity. That's the concept that I think is born out of professional environmentalism, that is sometimes embarrassed that there's not full participation or more full participation from people of color or groups that have been kind of disenfranchised, poor people, people living in rural areas. So diversity is only part of that 3-legged stool, right? Typically people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I resent sometimes, though, is the use of diversity to typify the participation of people of color. We're much more than diversity. We're big-time stakeholders in a lot of these issues. And our position, our point of view, often gets ignored because of the presumption of environmental illiteracy, which is outrageous. Right? We are leaders, we are change agents, we as people of color have all kinds of environmental contributions to make that exceed the notion of diversity. I would be remiss if I didn't mention something that is an amazing convergence, is that the work of Patuxent Riverkeeper began on the Gullah Sea Islands several years ago with a series of ceremonies called Kumbalamba. And Kumbalamba was a part of I'm sure my colleague on the panel is familiar with these. So our work for Ford Foundation took place in Africa and on the Gullah Sea Islands to unite traditional healers. So the values of Patuxent Riverkeeper were born on the Gullah Sea Islands and transplanted into Maryland on the Patuxent River when our work changed and became more local. It used to be more international. Now it's become local. So if those values sound familiar, it's because we and the sister from the Gullah Sea Islands come from very similar ideological roots. The EJ community is a small community. We often find we run into the same people. And part of the vision is to make sure that community is much bigger and much more integrated into the mainstream community, that everyone is doing environmental justice, not just an afterthought.
We've got 5 minutes left, and I think like every moderator who's been on these sessions, they wish they had at least an hour and a half more to talk with you all, because there's so much ground to cover. But I'm going to ask you to leave us with where you find hope. And if I can ask you for a minute or so of just pointing us the way to where you find hope in your communities. Dejah, I'm going to actually start with you and ask you, where are those sources for you?
Yeah, sources of hope for me being an organizer with Sunrise, I think, are getting to join. We just launched something called Sunrise School, where we're connecting the COVID crisis with the climate crisis. And we get like over 3,000 people joining those calls every week, and seeing just young people from across the country that are politicized in this moment and excited to step up and organize and engage their communities around these crises and climate justice and environmental justice. And so I think just getting to meet so many young people who are excited to step up and take up leadership in this moment is what gives me hope, honestly, and gives me a lot of the will to continue organizing despite living in the midst of a global pandemic and a lot of the election stuff that's happening. And I feel like a lot of the setbacks that make it easy for us to just give up and wallow in despair. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Fred, where do you find hope?
You know,
when you're
40
paddling
years,
on the river?
40 years of struggle for people and communities. And here I am with my hair a whole different color than when I started out. What gives me hope is young people who seek me out. It's stunning and surprising to me because they want to learn about the battles we fought and they want to know the stuff that we know. And that gives me hope is that we're planting seeds that will last, that we actually really maybe did get a few things done, as much as some days I feel like, wow, did we make a difference at all? Or did we just make a living? I mean, that's the choice we make. Are we making a difference today or are we making a living? Some days we're doing one or the other. It's rare we get both in the same day. And so that's really exciting to me that young people want to know what we know and are building on this work. And that's humbling because most of the time I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I don't claim to have any great wisdom on this stuff, but people are learning and taking guidance and inspiration from this work. And that, hallelujah. Hallelujah.
That's great. Great. Queen Quet, where's your hope? Where does it come from?
Hope. I don't use the word hope.
Queen Quet, I'm going to ask you the same
faith.
question. Where's your hope?
So I have faith.
Hmm.
Yeah, can you hear me? I started answering. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I don't generally use the word hope.
Yes.
I use the word faith, as I'm a person of faith. And so my faith comes from God Almighty, and it also comes from being here on these islands between Jacksonville, North Carolina, and Jacksonville, Florida, and being on the Sea Islands, knowing that my ancestors were enslaved on these islands, but they always had the faith that this day would come, that we have the opportunity to stand in our own self-determination. And so I draw from them. And if some would say San Kopa, if Hone no way Hone the dear from Hone Guai no way Hone the Guai is what we would say. And I draw from our spirituals. So when I can walk out in my field and walk out over the same earth that they planted and know I'm doing it because I choose to do it, and they did it because somebody was beating them into submission to do it, and still I can hear their voices ringing out saying, hold on, just a little while longer, hold on, just a little while longer, hold on, just a little while longer, everything why be all right. I know that I can go on like they went on, and we gwine be ya. We da been ya, and ain't a gwine nowhere tall.
Wow. And on that note, I want to thank you all, Fred Tutman, Dejah Powell, and Queen Quet, for sharing your vision for what an environmentally just world could look like, should look like. I know that as we spend the day together and beyond, your words will echo in our hearts, in our minds, and in our work. Again, I want to thank you for the work that you do, for sharing it so generously with all of us. I look forward to our paths meeting in the future when we can be together again. And again, I want to thank everyone at Earth Optimism for bringing us together. And again, I particularly want to thank Ruth Anastol, who is the best of the Smithsonian. I encourage you to come back and spend the day with us at Earth Optimism. Please don't forget to check out our guest bios. There's so much to learn from them online. And again, thank you all for being with us.